From Washington, the McLaughlin Group, the American original. For over 3 decades, the sharpest minds, best sources, hardest talk.
Hello, and welcome to another edition of the McLaughlin Group. I'm your host, Tom Rogan. This week's panelists are the familiar faces of Eleanor, Clift, Clarence Page, and Pat Buchanan. And our special guest this week is Emily Jashinsky from The Federalist. Welcome, Emily.
It's great to be here, Tom.
Good to have you. All right, a tradition here at the McLaughlin Group, our annual year-end awards. All right, we shall move on to our first issue, which is the first award of this show. Pat, why don't you start us off with Sorry to See You Go?
Sorry to see you go. Bond, James Bond. Sean Connery, great, delightful actor, 007, other movies. He was a terrific fellow and a great actor and a great product of Scotland, and I'm sorry to see him gone.
Very well said. Eleanor?
Ruth Bader Ginsburg, a great woman, role model, and I especially miss her vote on the Supreme Court.
Okay. Emily?
I'm going to say John James. He's now lost 2 really close Senate races in Michigan, and that really is going to hurt his future career in politics. He's a great candidate. He has been touted as the future of the Republican Party, and to lose 2 close elections like that, it's a real bummer in terms of his future.
Okay. Clarence?
Well, those are all great choices, but my choice is Meghan Markle and Prince Harry for renouncing their royalty. I'm so sorry to see that go, but after watching the Crown series, the Queen movie, and a lot of other good documentation, I can see why they decided to leave Britain.
Okay, I'm so happy to see them go, but my so sorry to see you go is Michael Goodboe, who was a CIA officer who was killed in Somalia. Sometimes we forget that there are a lot of people who are not in the military and other government agencies, or simply trying to do the right thing, humanitarian workers who lose their lives too early. So Michael Goodboe is mine. All right, Eleanor, most honest.
Shared award, Chris Krebs, the national security official who said that the election was decided fairly and honestly without any foreign interference. And Alexander Vindman, who testified in the impeachment drama earlier this year and was fired for telling the truth about the president, pressuring the president of Ukraine to try to come up with dirt on Hunter Biden.
Okay. Emily, why don't you go next?
I'm going with Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan, the podcast host Joe Rogan. I'm saying he's most honest because he signed an extremely lucrative deal with Spotify this year to distribute his show on that platform. And the reason that people love him and that his show continues to explode in popularity is because he's honest. He sits down and he has multi-hour-long conversations with very prominent guests, everybody from Elon Musk to Bernie Sanders to Tulsi Gabbard. He gets legitimate political people on the show. He's been a political force. And it's not because he sort of traffics in the usual political spin. It's just because he's honest.
Okay, Clarence?
At first, I thought she said Tom Rogan.
That's another story.
Yeah, that's okay. I'm greatly relieved, Tom. You can stick around here. But no, I think the most honest, Eleanor kind of stole my thunder there, but Georgia's Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, who committed the egregious sin of telling the truth that Donald Trump lost Georgia in the election and 2 recounts. And for this, his reward is to be terrorized with phone calls to his home and other kinds of harassment. And this is very much like what happened to Krebs there. And this is the kind of era we are in, unfortunately, and it's got to stop.
Okay, Pat, most honest.
William Barr, Attorney General. He came into office and took down said that the Mueller report had no collusion, no conspiracy. It was a brave thing to do. The establishment came down on his head. Then when Donald Trump was asking about the election, Barr said, we see some signs of fraud, but there's no massive fraud that would overturn this. So I guess he alienated and antagonized the other powerful force. Seems to me the guy, when he's got all these enemies, you look and say, how did he get them? And I think he did them by some courageous actions.
My most honest Secret Service in terms of honesty in their fidelity to their oaths, protecting politicians regardless of their own political characters. And I thought, as a good example of that, the Secret Service agent who was with the president when he went on his little drive about when he was infected with coronavirus, unlike most other people from inside the administration, did not immediately end up on CNN or writing a book, just kept on going with his job. Something to look for, I think, from more of our public servants. Anyway, Emily, most overrated story in 2020.
I have a good one for this. That would be Michael Bloomberg, who spent about $1.1 billion on his presidential campaign. And this actually, his level of being overrated actually goes beyond the presidential campaign. He poured millions of dollars into states when Joe Biden was the nominee that actually Joe Biden lost. States like Florida, states like Ohio. It's a big deal. If we remember when Michael Bloomberg announced his candidacy, it was splashed everywhere that this was the game changer. He spent all of that money, got all of that media coverage, and he just won American Samoa.
Very good. All right, Clarence.
I was going to say he's got to send his money in earlier next time. But the most overrated story. There's a bunch. I can think of the Hunter Biden story. I can think of the Dominion voting machines. There's a bumper crop of phony stories going around that get tremendous mileage because we're in that kind of an age once again where the paranoid style of American politics is in full bloom.
Okay. Eleanor?
I'm going to go with the impeachment hearings. The failure to convict only emboldened Donald Trump to go out and do everything that we thought he was doing behind closed doors, to do it openly, up to and including his last-minute attempt to overturn the results of the election on his way out the door.
Okay. Pat?
The most overrated story is the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, Meghan and Harry. What are we covering these people for? And all their antics.
All right.
Now, I'm a fan. I'm a closet fan of the Royals.
Okay. All right. Very good. So you're coming out the closet on that one at least, Pat. All right. My most overrated story of 2020, China's new climate change commitments. Let's see if that combines well with the new coal plants. But I hope I'm wrong about that. All right. We will go on to biggest story of 2020. Eleanor.
Obviously, it's the pandemic and the president's abdication of leadership, making the United States the worst hit country in the world with more cases, more deaths, more everything. It's a tragedy.
Emily.
I also have something related to the pandemic, but mine is China's cover-up in the early days of the pandemic. I think it's remarkable that any nation, particularly one that deals so much with other countries, would take those steps and unleash a virus and a pandemic on this magnitude in terms of the lives that have been lost, the businesses that have been destroyed, the lives that have been upended. It's impossible to actually comprehend the magnitude of tragedy that China is directly responsible for in terms of that early cover-up.
And I think that's a good one, Emily. And I would say I'd be quite surprised that the Trump administration has not declassified more stuff. I mean, the NSA has some very good intelligence on data deletion, big data deletion that the Chinese engaged in around Wuhan and that lab in particular. Anyway, Pat, yours.
The biggest story, I go along with most of the panel here, it's COVID-19, the epidemic itself, but the economic crash that followed it, and also the election and its impact upon the election. It changed everything in 2020. Was a dramatic, historic year. And I do agree with Emily, the idea the Chinese Communist Party is getting away with mass murder.
Okay, Clarence?
Yeah, I agree. The pandemic was the number one story of the year and really characterizes this year. The question is not so much is it China's fault, because we know what's happened there in hindsight, but how has America handled it and how has the Trump administration handled it? And that has had tremendous repercussions, obviously, on our election, probably cost President Trump his presidency. But I just recently learned more about the flu epidemic back in 1917-18, when President Wilson completely ignored that pandemic while it was going on. And we later found out he ignored a lot of things. But it really astounds me, though, considering how big of a presence the pandemic has had for us, how little of a presence it had in the White House back then, while at the same time, hundreds of thousands of people were dying.
Okay. I'm going to go with China more broadly in terms of really, I think, the unveiling this year of what is a new Cold War with China in terms of the structure of the international order. Emily, best reporting.
The best reporting of 2020, in my opinion, is found in Abigail Schreier's book, Irreversible Damage. It's a very brave book, and it's a book that should not be ideological. It's a book that was the distribution of was made more difficult by a lot of corporate media outlets and by Amazon, which banned advertisements for the book. It documents something very brave, which is the social contagion, the real life consequences of some of the fringier elements of gender ideology that have ended up causing a lot of young girls to undergo irreversible damage, as the title intimates, to their bodies, based on some research and some ideological motivators that may not be sound and that we don't have the full medical understanding of yet. So I would say the best reporting goes to Abigail Schreier in that book.
Okay, Clarence?
I think the New York Times reporting on President Donald Trump's income tax returns. This was a story that's been hanging out there for throughout the Trump presidency, and many complaints that President Trump has not turned over his tax returns like previous presidents did, going back with at least Jimmy Carter. But you know, the press eventually can uncover this sort of thing, and that still happens. So I hope that's a warning for future presidents.
Very good. Eleanor?
The New York Times 1619 Project, which was a long overdue attempt to reframe American history, taking into account slavery and the contributions of Black Americans.
Okay, Pat?
There's another case and another side of these stories, which is not very well represented in the media. But I do think, and I will say so, Fox News has done a courageous job in providing the other side, both in reportage and commentary. And I'm going to say hats off to Tucker and Sean and Laura.
Okay. And we do, you know, it's good to have diversity of opinions. I would say the best reporting the best reporting this year for some more diversity of opinions, Tim McMillan at the Debrief, new media outlet, who broke the story on the Black Triangle UFO incident. All right, Eleanor, most inspiring moment of 2020.
My daddy changed the world. 6-year-old daughter of George Floyd, coming to terms as a child would by the murderous death of her father, which sparked a social justice movement in this country that rivals the civil rights movement of the 60s. Okay,
Emily?
I would say it would be the confirmation of Amy Coney Barrett, because she's somebody who I think fulfills the vision that a lot of young women have for themselves, which is to have incredible careers that they work hard to establish, and beautiful families, big families as big as they can imagine. And so I think to have a woman, one aligned with Christian values, and you might even say conservative values, stand up against the forces of opposition and be confirmed, I think, revealed the resiliency of our institutions in this country, something a lot of us have been concerned about. And it was also a wonderful moment, I think, for women in the country.
Okay, Pat?
I think it's the most inspiring moment, or certainly one of them, is the morning we woke up and found out that Pfizer had found the vaccine, and the vaccine had worked, and 90% of those who had taken it had become immune to the COVID virus. Those are some of the bright spots in the year, American technology, medical technology, and frankly, Trump deserves some credit for Operation Warp Speed, and I intend to give him a little here on this show.
I think he deserves more than a little. Clarence, most inspiring moment.
Yes, I was reflecting on this, Tom, here very recently, and this has not been an easy year for finding inspiring moments. And then I saw the coverage of the Rockefeller Center Christmas tree, one of the most peaked-looking Christmas trees perhaps they've ever had in history. And people saw it as emblematic of a lousy year. But you know what happened? The workmen found an owl alive and trapped in the branches of that tree. They stopped their truck coming down from upstate New York. They took the owl to a rehabilitation center, and everybody just fell in love with this owl. And I fell in love with the owl, and I said, boy, that owl's got the kind of spirit that we really need right now. And the owl has now been named Rockefeller, Tom.
All right, well, that is an inspiring moment. Mine is the election going off peacefully, as I think, well, certainly I expected would be the case, but it's inspiring, at least in its repudiation, to the people who said that a The whole world was going to fall apart. All right. What will Biden's approval be, or approval rating be, I should say? Pat, why don't you start us off?
Well, I agree with what Clarence was talking about earlier about the country being divided, and it's really not going to come together. And in the run-up to the Biden presidency, it seems that there's more division ahead than there is unity. So I'm going to put his rating at about 45 to 50% at the end of 2021.
Sorry, 2021. Yeah, Eleanor.
Hovering around 50%, a little below. If he's lucky, he'll hit 50. That's where all modern presidents have been at the end of their first year, with the exception of Donald Trump, who never reached 50%. I think the highest he ever achieved was 46%. So that's a pretty safe bet to put Biden in the continuum of history.
Emily.
I have a similar answer to that question, which my guess is 52, and that's for the reasons that Eleanor stated. I think we've entered an era in this country's history where we are at the level of division in our partisan breakdown that it's really difficult for anybody, no matter how effective, no matter how likable, to break 50, let alone get into that 55 range. But I do think Biden himself, if you're measuring approval for Biden on a personal level, as opposed to his administration or the federal government, I think he, it seems innocuous enough. And so that's why I say that he's going to break that 50% threshold by the end of the year. He may never get much higher, but that would be my estimation.
Clarence?
This is the toughest question you've ever asked us, Tom. I'm sure Pat will remember Yogi Berra saying it's hard to predict the future because it hasn't happened yet. But I think my estimate was the same as Eleanor's, 51%, which would be a point higher than Donald Trump ever reached in his presidency. So we'll see how this roulette wheel lands.
Okay, I'm going to say 55%. I think the Christmas boost will help Joe Biden at the end of next year, in the sense that the juxtaposition with that holiday season and this holiday season and the ending of COVID, fingers crossed, will be a big boost for Joe Biden. I also think perhaps people will look fondly, at least for a moment, having a Christmas season, perhaps with less Twitter activity from the president, commander-in-chief. All right. Eleanor, destined for political stardom in 2021.
I think there are a lot of contenders for that spot, but I'm going to go with the safest one, and that is the Biden's cat. They have said they're going to bring a cat to the White House in addition to their 2 rescue dogs. It'll be a rescue cat, I'm sure. And whoever she or he is will gain notoriety, just like the cat who hangs around at 10 Downing Street in the UK has gotten quite famous on Twitter and Facebook.
Very good. Clarence, why don't you go next?
I think, destined for political stardom, I got a sentimental favorite, Senator Ben Sasse, the up-and-coming Republican senator from Nebraska, who's very bright, shown he's got a bit of a, I'm not going to say independent streak, let's just say he thinks for himself, and he was brave enough to be critical of President Trump when he needed it. But at the same time, he is, the main thing is, Tom, when I first met Ben Sasse, first thing he said was, I used to watch McLaughlin Group when I was a kid. I was raised on the program. So he's got to get my vote now.
Okay, very good. Pat, why don't you go next?
Destined for political stardom, I've got Justice Amy Coney Barrett. She already made a decision where she displaced the Chief Justice of the United States as the swing vote, and you're going to have decision after decision in the future. She could be on the court, the Lord willing, 35 or 40 years, and you're going to have decision after decision where she is the decisive vote for the conservatives. The battle it's been going on ever since Nixon and Berger and Warren and Fortas may finally be won, at least temporarily.
Okay, Emily?
My answer is Tom Rogan. No, I'm kidding. My actual answer is Josh Hawley, Senator Josh Hawley from Missouri. We've seen in this last month of the year how he has pushed the president and pushed the Republican Party to include the stimulus checks in a second recovery package. That is a very, very big deal. It signals the future of the Republican Party, I believe, and I think he has positioned himself as the leader on the Hill of the future of the Republican Party. There are a lot of people who've been vying for that literally for years, since the Tea Party, actually. And I think Josh Hawley, who's in his first term in the Senate, has positioned himself as somebody who's willing to sort of toss out Republican orthodoxy and have conversations about things like direct stimulus checks to voters. That's a really big deal. I think he's changing the direction of the Republican Party, and I think he's doing it really as the leader of that movement.
I will say that depending on what happens in the Georgia runoff elections, if Republicans lose control of the Senate, Joe Manchin will be destined for stardom as an insulator against more progressive impulses on the Democratic Party. That will generate him a lot of attention. And if Republicans hold the Senate, it'll be Mitch McConnell again, acting as a check on Joe Biden, and certainly for the part of conservatives, a winner in that regard. Okay, Emily, why don't you go for Destined for Political Oblivion in 2021?
Yes, gladly. I'm going to say the Never Trump Lincoln Project Republicans who established a niche for themselves that really only worked over the course of the Trump era, which was selling out all of the values that they profited off of peddling to the rest of the country for years, and got lucrative contracts, book deals, and consulting gigs out of it. They will discover in a Democratic administration and in a changed Republican Party, there is really no room for them. And I think some of their coffers will absolutely dry up.
Okay, Eleanor?
Well, I wish I could say Destined for Oblivion would be Donald Trump, but I'll go with his wingman, Mr. Pence. I don't think he's a viable presidential candidate. I don't really see that he has a political future.
Okay, Clarence?
I had to laugh when Eleanor said that, because I was going to say the same thing once again. And I think Mike Pitt's going to have a great future in broadcasting again. He used to have a radio show. He can go on the evangelical circuit. There's a lot of things he can do, but I agree. I don't see much of a political future unless he has a big comeback we can talk about next year.
All right, Pat?
All right.
Emily stole mine.
I'm so
Destined
sorry.
for Political Oblivion. You've been looking at my notes.
I'm so
Got
sorry.
right down here. Destined for Political Oblivion in 2021. The Never Trumpers have lost their reason for existence, their raison d'etre, Tom. They
Okay.
spent the whole 4 years on the attack and negative, and now they got nobody to attack.
Very good. I'm going to say Angela Merkel, who will be leaving office in 2021. I would say very successful chancellor in many ways, but the delusion, I think, on the part of some in the Western media that she somehow was ever the leader of the free world, considering German defense spending and her affection for Nord Stream 2, destined for political oblivion. Anyway, macro prediction, Emily.
This one might seem a little foggy, but I'm going to say that over the course of the next year, we will develop or take serious steps towards developing new political language that better reflects the ideological realignment that's happening right now in terms of the parties. Now, that's not to say we're going to toss out the left-right dichotomy. That's not going anywhere, but we are going to have to start thinking about terms like moderate and centrist and radical and far right and far left in very different ways. So I think over the course of the next year, our understanding of those terms collectively, not just here in Washington and in the Beltway, is really going to start to shift. Part of that involves Biden, who is really sort of like a centrist on fiscal issues and on cultural issues, is much further to the left. So with him front and center, that's really going to have to provoke a conversation and a change about how we think of these things.
Very good. Eleanor.
With the vaccine coming online, there's a lot of discussion about people not trusting the government, not wanting to take it, and the anti-vaxxers are out there. I think once you see President Biden, Vice President Kamala Harris, former President Barack Obama, endless figures bellying up to the television camera and putting their arms out and getting the injection, I think you're going to see a substantial portion of the American public eager to get this vaccine. And I think the bigger problem is going to be the shortage of available vaccine coming online and figuring out, who to get it, and to avoid the special treatment that is often endemic in American life, people with connections being able to access the vaccine while people who need it the most get it the last. I think we've really got to address that, and I look forward to the Biden administration taking aggressive steps in that way.
Macro prediction, Mar-a-Lago, which is in Florida, down near Palm Beach, Tom, will become the revolutionary base camp of a new resistance. Lots of activity, and the press will be down there. Even Clarence might travel down there. It will be so exciting.
Okay, Clarence.
If the weather's nice, although I thought you were going to say the global warming was going to sink Mar-a-Lago down there. The water level is rising. In any case, I like Emily's outlook there. I've been looking for a revival of the dynamic center in our politics for decades now. Maybe we're on the verge of something like it, because we're obviously going to have in the short run more gridlock right now, unless, as I say, a couple of miracles happen in Georgia in January. But we still got an infrastructure in this country that's falling apart. We still have a yawning wage and income gap that's getting bigger. We've got common problems across party lines, and we need to find common solutions. Americans used to be good at that. Mitch McConnell and Joe Biden used to be good at it. Maybe we're going to start to see them work at it again.
All right. I make a macro prediction on Clarence's point that the biggest issue we face as a country, certainly domestically, entitlement reform will not get resolved. But thank you very much for watching, and we hope you have a good rest of the weekend.